Number 4, the Wildspire Wastes. This one a hot take? I'm actually kind of not sure. I don't see this map get talked about quite as much as I think it deserves to be. Personally, I think the Wildspire Waste rules. Yeah, it's kinda the token desert map of Monster Hunter World, but it's way more than that. Way more than kinda any other desert map in Monster Hunter, honestly. It's a desert, and a miniature forest, and a swamp, and a canyon map with caves all over it, all at once, and it doesn't feel lazy or slapped together or cluttered at all. I actually think it's kind of ingenious how they pulled this off. See, the Wildspire Waste is indeed located in a dried out and arid part of the continent, but geographically, it's close enough to the more humid regions of the New World that house the ancient forest that some rivers of water from that area have flowed here. The river that has flowed into the Wildspire Waste is the entity that gives this map its entire structure. Buckle up, we're going to be talking about art direction and progression for the 47th time on this list. This might be the best one though. I love the Tri-Volcano, but this one's really, really sick. So if you go looking, you can actually find the point where the water flows from the foresty regions off a cliff, forms a waterfall, creates a watering hole, and that water eventually carved out a second river which cut through the rocky walls of this place, spilled down into a huge flatland of dirt and grime, formed a massive marshy wetlands, and then that spills down some extra hills, and that water then forms these big muddy bogs. There's an advantage to the classic Monster Hunter maps where they can use the fact that they're broken up into loading zones to create these big shifts in terrain and art style between the areas. They can create a lot of distance and without needing to explore that distance itself. They don't have to communicate every singular inch of a region's change, just showcase the major bullet points. This gives the modern seamless 5th generation maps a bit of a challenge when they want to create shifts in their atmosphere and surroundings. That's because their overall size is far more limited and they have to show you every single tiny change. So when a seamless locale can change up its environments this well, it's really damn impressive. And the Wildspire Waste is really damn impressive. It's the fact that you have this one singular landmark, this river, which flows from a different locale, and the fact that this river carves and redefines and fleshes out and gives life to so many components of this one other map is so excellent. And then if you go a little north into the region where the river has no provenance, you're gonna get to the really cool big chunks of dried out classic desert maps that you can go fight on. And then how is the fighting? It's excellent. There's maybe 2 zones that are mildly annoying every once in a while. Area 3 is part of the forest region. It's a little small, has a lot of slopes, only has 2 ways out. It has a number of pretty easy to hit plants that can spill poison onto the ground. It's not impossible to get corner trapped here, and some monsters like Glavenus and Deviljho just feel a little bit too large to fight comfortably. There's also Area 7, which is a super skinny little zone that's tucked right in the middle of a canyon. That one sits between the marshes and the desert. It's not uncommon to be batted into one of the small hallways here and then comboed to death. The other thing about this zone is that it's a super popular travel route for monsters to use, so you will very often be fighting something in this narrow little canyon, only to have another monster muscle their way into the fight, and now you're stuck in that narrow little canyon with 2 monsters, and this happens a ton. It's not the worst thing in the world though. These areas are just somewhat annoying with a moderate degree of consistency. A lot of these zones are nice and spacious with some fun elements to fight on and around though. I really enjoy the huge open marshlands of Area 4. There's a lot of breathing room here, which is great because this is another area where monsters tend to enjoy assembling. It's far more manageable with this amount of space though. There's a whole bunch of small rock platforms you can hop off for mounting attacks. There's a few scattered paratoads you can use here. I like the mix of muddy water, rocky terrain, and long wild grasses and flowers. It's got an aesthetic I enjoy a ton. I do like the deeper bogs of 9 and 10, which slow down your movement, but not to a painful degree, and they use the new shallow water mechanics to allow Gyrototus to actually fight like an aquatic monster, despite the lack of underwater combat in the game. These zones have some rocks and wedge beetles that you can use for better traversal, and encourage the use of the waterproof mantle for uninhibited movement. Area 1 is the main forest region here. It's a nice shady area for some of the less heat-resistant monsters to use. It has a few well-placed ledges for combat, some large trees that serve as minor obstacles, and is decently well-sized. It's another zone like the marshes that helps keep the Wildspire Waste feel varied. Area 8 is your big, fat, open desert zone. Once again, very spacious, great for fights like Glavenus, Teostra, and Diablos. It keeps itself interesting to fight on by being covered in sloping dunes and destructible spires. These give you lots of vertical attack windows and keep the place visually engaging. Directly under this big desert is a huge underground cavern, which is a perfectly good battle zone as well. However, it's the reason for one of the coolest interactions in all of Monster Hunter. If there is a Diablos down in these caverns, and you manage to agitate the Noyos wingdrakes up above ground, they will shriek. Then shrieking will enrage the Diablos. He'll come shooting up out of the ground, and if you and the monster are fighting close enough to his exit point, you'll get dragged down into the caverns from this pit that Diablos created. Then Diablos will dig back down and attack you all. Speaking of Diablos being down here, Area 14 is Diablos' nest and has a sick special interaction where there are these effectively sand waterfalls that Diablos can burrow into and out of for horizontal digging attacks that he's never been able to do in previous games. There's also Area 6, which I adore. This is another absolutely massive zone, about as large as the Marshlands, but with way more stuff. It's got several raised platforms at varying elevations, there's rocky bridges and large rock walls that you can use to rain down aerial attacks on monsters, there's armored herds of Apsaros that you might need to contend with, there's the constant threat of being flung off the large cliffs. It's an incredibly dynamic battle zone with just a ton of interactable stuff to play around with. I think battling here is an absolute ton of fun. The music is pretty damn good too. It kinda somehow feels relaxed and atmospheric while also being a decent fight track with some good energy. It's got a pretty slow tempo and a number of sections which usually occur right after the big blaring brass chunks where they kind of quiet things down considerably and limit the instrumentation. These chunks can sometimes feel more like a desert wasteland ambient track instead of like a battles track, but I do like it musically. There's some cool lower brass that sounds nice and fat and makes the monsters you're fighting feel a little bit bigger and heavier. We've got yet another flute soloist here, which I'm definitely not sick of hearing, but I'm just now noticing how much Monster Hunter really likes to use this. There's a particular part right towards the end of the music loop that I love, where they use that flute solo, take that to build into a nice big climactic battlefield with all the horns and strings playing nice and loud, and then they sharply cut that down into this fun bit where they have the percussion, the low horns, and the strings play this cool rhythm in sync, while they then kind of spice up the edges of the track a little bit with some mixed percussion in there. There's a great amount of instrument choice tossed in along with your more conventional orchestra, and it makes for a super enjoyable piece of music that doesn't always work as the best battle track. This map is awesome. It's so much more than just a desert map. It's got all these elements from different kinds of biomes expertly blended and slotted together to make this vibrant ecosystem in a way that's sensible. I think this is some of the best locale diversity on an individual map that Monster Hunter has to offer. It's got a few battle zones that tailor to the abilities of its monsters. It has a large best area of awesome creatures that cover multiple monster type and levels of strength. It's got a fun soundtrack, some pretty awesome battle zones, and it's just a map that I always really enjoy loading into and just running around on. Its map theme has a few parts that drop a lot of the tension. It has one or two zones that are only okay, and the narrow canyon pathways can occasionally result in monster traffic jams, but these are pretty forgivable gripes for a map with excellent combats and a fantastic retooling of the classic desert map archetype that masterfully displays the strengths of seamless locale design at a level that none of its contemporaries could compete with.